When your eyes are deceived, when words sound beautiful, when actions seem harmless, there is still one thing that cannot be faked. It is the truth hidden inside the energy a person carries. In a world full of masks and performances, understand this one deep truth: energy never lies. You must learn to feel before you listen. Before you analyze someone's behavior, learn to notice how their presence changes your inner state. There are people whose words are kind, whose smiles are warm, whose gestures are socially perfect, and yet something still feels wrong. Something quiet inside you whispers caution. That whisper is your oldest alarm system. It is the wisdom of your inner sense, older than language, older than reasoning, older than the desire to be polite. Energy does not wear a costume. It cannot pretend for very long. It does not use perfume. It does not know how to lie. It simply radiates what it actually is. And when a person carries darkness inside them, even if they try hard to appear bright, you will feel it. An unease, a tightness in the chest, a shift in your breath, a disturbance in your emotional rhythm. Some people carry an energy that dries out the soul. Before they arrived, you were laughing. Now you start doubting yourself. Before speaking with them, you had clarity. Now you feel confused. You were healing, growing, breathing freely, and then they appeared, and suddenly your progress feels small. Your confidence gets questioned. Your inner light dims. This is not a coincidence. This is not your imagination. It is the trace of a spiritual weight beginning to settle on your shoulders. Words can be rehearsed. Actions can be staged, smiles can be manufactured, but energy is the essence of a person, and it reflects the truth of their inner state, whether they intended to or not. Someone can tell you they love you while secretly envying your light. Someone can appear supportive in public while quietly resenting you in private. Energy needs no translation. It is the language of the soul. And your spirit, when it isn't drowned out by noise, always understands that language. The mind will argue, the emotions will attach, the ego will want to prove its own loyalty and good judgment. But silence will reveal what logic cannot see. Sit beside someone in stillness and simply observe what happens in your own spirit. Does their presence calm your thoughts, or does it stir them into chaos? After spending time with them, do you feel more alive or more drained? Do they leave you with clarity or with confusion? These are not small incidental signs. These are signals, sacred signals. Often the darkness we encounter does not arrive with fire and smoke. It arrives with compliments. It makes promises. It wears the face of someone familiar, and yet its energy leaves behind a trail of quiet inner damage. You are not imagining things when you feel tension around certain people. You are not too sensitive when you notice your peace disappearing in their presence. You are simply awake. You are simply perceiving what most people choose to ignore. There are people who do not want you to rise higher, not openly, but silently. They smile when you talk about your dreams, while secretly hoping you will fail. They offer help, but their help comes with hidden hooks attached. Their energy does not celebrate your light. It competes with it. They do not protect your spirit. They feed on it. And you can only recognize people like this once you stop listening to their words and start feeling their essence instead. Awareness is not paranoia. Sensitivity is not weakness. Spiritual intuition is not superstition. It is a survival skill. You are not being asked to judge other people. You are being asked to discern what you allow into your sacred inner space. You owe no one access to the peace of your soul. You owe no one an explanation for trusting your own inner knowing. Because energy, pure, raw, honest energy, never lies. When you make room for silence, you begin to see clearly. When you stop rushing, stop fixing, stop pleasing, stop over-explaining yourself, you start to notice the invisible forces that either nourish your spirit or quietly suffocate it. And when you walk into a room and feel the atmosphere shift, do not ignore that feeling. There is no greater teacher than energy. It is the voice behind the words, the shadow behind the smile, the truth behind the mask. It is always speaking. The only question is whether we have the courage to listen. The darkness that doesn't announce itself. There is a form of darkness that does not roar. It does not strike loudly. It does not arrive dressed as a storm. It comes quietly. It seeps into ordinary conversations. It hides behind jokes. It wraps itself in the language of care. And yet its nature is parasitic. This is the darkness of constant, patient manipulation. It always begins small. A friend, a partner, a family member starts to question your memory. I never said that, they insist, even though you remember the words clearly. You're too sensitive. You always exaggerate everything. Every time you try to set a boundary, something strange happens over time. It isn't them who changes, it's you. You begin to doubt yourself. You replay conversations in your head over and over. You find yourself apologizing more often sometimes without even knowing what exactly you're apologizing for. You start seeking their approval, as though your own sense of truth becomes incomplete without it. This is not coincidence. This is not an accident. It is the slow dismantling of your inner compass, carried out by someone who is seeking control rather than genuine connection. A manipulator does not need obvious power. They don't need to raise their voice. They simply lower your self-trust instead. They don't need to chain your body. They weaken your faith in your own perception. Manipulation is a form of spiritual poison. Its goal is not to destroy you all at once. Its goal is to slowly change the way you see yourself, so that you become easier to manage, easier to dominate, easier to silence. If you look closely, you will notice a pattern. They twist every disagreement so that they end up looking like the victim. They reduce every conversation back to your flaws. They plant doubt disguised as concern. I'm just worried about the choices you're making. They blend truth and falsehood so skillfully that over time, even strong and grounded people begin to question their own eyes. This is not simply a psychological game. It is a spiritual drain. Because manipulation is never really about winning an argument. It is about feeding an ego and dimming another person's light. When someone repeatedly dismisses your intuition, makes you feel guilty for having needs, or sabotages your growth while pretending to support it, that is not love. That is spiritual warfare disguised as care. And the most dangerous manipulators are rarely loud. They operate with calculation. They may never insult you openly, but they will consistently, quietly imply that you are less capable, less balanced, less intelligent, less deserving of clarity. They do this so your dependence on them grows while your trust in yourself disappears. Because once you stop trusting your own decisions, you begin relying on theirs instead. That is precisely how they gain power. Pay attention to repetition. Manipulation is never a single mistake. It is a pattern. Do they always avoid accountability? Do they turn their apologies into weapons? I already said sorry. What more do you want from me? Do they only apologize when it benefits them? Do they later use your vulnerability against you? Does every conflict leave behind more confusion instead of resolution? A genuine companion listens to understand. A manipulator listens to find leverage. A true friend gives your feelings room to exist. A manipulator uses your emotions to generate guilt or gain control. A loving presence helps you think clearly, act freely, and feel safe in your own truth. A manipulative presence makes you shrink yourself just to preserve an artificial peace. That is not harmony. That is quiet control. The key is not anger, and it is not resistance. The key is awareness. The moment you begin to see the pattern, the spell begins to break. The moment you name what is actually happening, not love, not care, not miscommunication, but ongoing manipulation, you take your mind back. And once your mind becomes clear, your spirit can no longer be kept in a cage. Notice how often, around certain people, you find yourself justifying yourself. Notice how much energy you spend explaining your own intentions. Notice how emotionally exhausted you feel after speaking with them. Are not small details. They are signs. And these signs do not shout. They whisper, and they keep whispering. until you are finally ready to hear them. The darkness of emptiness. Not all darkness looks like chaos. Sometimes darkness feels like a vacuum. It doesn't arrive with noise, it arrives with absence. It isn't loud, it's lifeless. The most dangerous presence in your life is not always the one that attacks you directly. Sometimes it is the one that slowly pulls you away from your own inner light. There are people whose souls no longer reach toward the light. They have chosen bitterness over growth, pride over humility, control over genuine connection. When people like this enter your life, their influence is not always obvious at first. Sometimes it feels like nothing is happening at all. Until one day you notice that your inner fire no longer burns as brightly as it used to. The light inside you is your connection to truth, to peace, to compassion, and to clarity. It is the pulse of your soul quietly telling you what is in alignment with you, what is right, and what gives your life meaning. But when you're surrounded by people who have lost connection with their own light, you begin to dim as well. Not because your light is broken, but because you're being wrapped in someone else's shadow. Often these people move through life with an empty gaze. You notice it not through what they say, but through what they clearly do not feel. You share your joy and receive cold politeness in return. You share your pain and are met with silence, or worse, indifference. They can never meet you at the depth of your feelings, because doing so would require them to touch something long buried inside themselves. When a soul loses its connection to light, empathy fades. Gratitude becomes difficult, sometimes impossible. Every situation gets filtered through cynicism and old resentment. They cannot celebrate other people's success because they are too preoccupied tallying what they believe life has taken from them. They cannot give sincerely because they are living in a kind of emotional scarcity. They cannot inspire you toward life because they have gone spiritually numb themselves. Over time, closeness with people like this starts to feel like moving through a spiritual fog. You can't always name exactly what's wrong, but you can feel that something is off. You become emotionally depleted. You start questioning your own enthusiasm, your own dreams, your own desires. Your spirit, which once soared, begins sinking lower and lower. And the more time you spend near people who have lost their connection to light, the more your own light begins to flicker. You slowly drift away from the things you love. You stop talking about your dreams. You hold back your joy. You quiet your own truth. And gradually, your inner world begins mirroring theirs, not because you lost your way, but because you let into your space someone who cannot walk toward the sun and who resents those who can. People like this do not always consciously want to pull you down, but they live in darkness, and darkness rarely tolerates light without trying to dim it. A soul disconnected from its own light cannot rejoice in your healing. It cannot understand your compassion. It does not recognize your inner peace as strength. It experiences it as a threat. Your capacity to forgive becomes something that unsettles them. Your ability to rise unsettles them. Your resilience becomes a mirror reflecting their own spiritual emptiness back at them. And so they respond not with kindness, but with criticism, not with curiosity, but with contempt. They question your beliefs. They mock your optimism. They try to reframe your purpose as naive fantasy. And if you're not careful, you may begin to absorb their inner emptiness as though it were your own truth. Understand this deeply. The light inside you is sacred. It was never meant to be explained to people who refuse to see it. You are not obligated to convince someone of their own blindness. Your responsibility is to protect your own vision, because light cannot thrive in an environment that constantly demands it grow dimmer. When a person has lost connection with their own light, their presence becomes spiritually cold. You don't feel seen, you feel watched. You don't feel heard, you feel analyzed. You don't feel safe, you feel merely tolerated. The warmth that normally moves from soul to soul disappears, and in its place comes a hollow stillness, one that doesn't nourish, doesn't inspire, doesn't help. It simply occupies space, slowly draining your vitality. Pay close attention to how people respond to your light. Not your success, not your status, but your spirit. Do they soften around you or do they harden? Do they lift you higher or remain indifferent? Do they support your growth or secretly hope you'll shrink? A person who has lost their own connection to light can never truly protect yours. Charm without depth. Charm is a powerful force. It is polished. It is attractive. It is carefully constructed. It draws people in with smooth words, warm gestures, and attention that appears sincere. But charm in the hands of someone disconnected from truth becomes a mask. And the danger of that mask is that it deceives the eyes, seduces the mind, and silences intuition. There are people who have perfected the art of appearing kind. They know exactly when to smile. They know how to give a compliment in a way that earns instant trust. They know how to speak softly while concealing intentions soaked in manipulation. They study your needs, your weaknesses, your insecurities, not in order to help you grow, but in order to learn how to manage you and gain access to your emotional doorways. People like this don't show you who they truly are. They show you exactly what you want to see. And in the early moments, their presence can feel like comfort, like safety, even like love. But it's essential to understand, truth never reveals itself in isolated moments. It reveals itself in repeated patterns. One kind act does not make a person kind. One emotional gesture does not make a person emotionally mature. One honest conversation does not make a person trustworthy. Real character does not show itself in what a person does once. It shows itself in what a person does consistently. This is exactly why it's dangerous to judge people by isolated episodes, because charm is not a reflection of honesty or integrity. Often it is nothing more than a well-rehearsed performance. Skilled manipulators play their roles beautifully. They wear empathy like a piece of clothing. They talk about personal growth without ever living it. They repeat spiritual phrases, motivational slogans, and popular psychological language, not because they live by these words, but because they know these words open doors into people's lives. If you only pay attention to how someone behaves when they need something from you, you will always be deceived. Watch instead how they behave when they have nothing to gain. Watch how they respond to your boundaries. Watch how they speak about other people when those people aren't in the room. Watch how they react to your success, your healing, and your growing self-respect. It is exactly in these small cracks that the truth breaks through and the illusion begins to fall apart. A person's repeated behavior is an echo of their inner world. If they always play the victim, even when they are the one causing harm that is not an accident, it's a pattern. If they show deep affection only when they're afraid of losing you, then turn cold the moment they feel back in control, that isn't passion. That's control itself. If they build emotional intimacy quickly, but vanish the moment responsibility is required, that isn't vulnerability, it's a performance. Charm means nothing without consistency. A person who genuinely cares about you will speak with love not only on sunny days. They will offer that same care through the storms as well. They will be generous not only when they're being praised, they will give even when no one is watching. They will support you not only during hard times, they will celebrate you when you rise. This is how authenticity is recognized, through rhythm, not through brief, dazzling flashes. We live in a time that worships image, where appearance often replaces substance, where charisma gets mistaken for character. But you must develop the ability to see past performance. Let time reveal people, because while charm can convince the world for a while, it cannot sustain a false image forever. Patterns always surface, repetition always reveals the truth. Train your awareness to notice a person's rhythm, not their isolated bursts of kindness. One kind word, one generous act, one emotional conversation. None of this defines a person on its own. What defines them is who they remain in the silence, in the inconsistency, in the space between applause and attention. If their kindness disappears the moment they're challenged, it was never real. If their presence fades as your own truth grows stronger, it was never built on love. If their support only exists when it benefits them, then it was never really support at all. It was self-interest wearing a disguise. There are people who use their charm as a tool. They sharpen it to cut through your defenses. They polish it to blind you and conceal their own darkness. And they change it depending on who they're with, like a costume tailored for each new audience. But your spirit must learn to listen more deeply than tone, more deeply than a smile, more deeply than a perfectly timed gesture. It must pay attention to repetition, to reaction, to rhythm. Because charm without depth is only a mask, and the soul is revealed not through single moments, but through patterns. When a person with real inner strength enters a room, they bring people together. They foster harmony. They strengthen trust. They allow others to breathe freely, speak openly, and feel safe standing in their own truth. But where spiritual distortion is present, the opposite happens. The atmosphere grows heavier. Tension rises. Bonds that once seemed strong begin to weaken. Where there was closeness, division starts to appear. The energy of division. Very often, destructive forces don't reveal themselves through open aggression. They operate quietly. Their goal isn't simply to harm one individual. It's to fracture an entire circle of love and trust surrounding that person. They accomplish this not through open conflict, but through a whisper campaign of chaos. They divide by spreading confusion. They set people against one another. They plant seeds of doubt, envy, resentment, and mistrust, drop by drop, until relationships that once felt sacred begin cracking with no clear cause. You must learn to notice this invisible hand creating disorder. Not everyone who smiles at your face is happy for you behind your back. Not everyone who listens to your pain treats it with compassion. Some people listen only to gather ammunition against you later. Some pretend to support you only to plant the seeds of conflict afterward. And slowly, the relationships around you start to feel unstable, not because something is inherently wrong with them, but because someone from outside is quietly poisoning the well. The energy of division is easy to recognize once you take a step back and look at the whole picture. Think carefully about what your relationships were like before this person entered the picture. Were your friendships stronger? Was your family more united? Was trust the foundation everything stood on? And what changed after they arrived? People with dark intentions thrive in an atmosphere of instability. They're uncomfortable with peace because peace demands honesty, and honesty exposes manipulation. So they manufacture unrest instead. They play both sides of a conflict, telling you what you want to hear, then telling someone else an entirely different story. They fuel drama and then pretend to be the solution. They light the fire, then show up dressed as the firefighter, and in doing so, they start to seem indispensable. They feel significant standing at the center of chaos they themselves created. This is one of the clearest signs of a person who carries division within them. They are constantly near tension, yet they never take responsibility for creating it. Somehow they are always the victim, always the misunderstood one, always just trying to help. But if you look closer, you'll notice that wherever they go, relationships suffer, connections break down, and love itself gets called into question. Peace gives way to gossip, suspicion, and emotional exhaustion. Don't let yourself be fooled by conditional kindness. Don't admire someone simply because they seem to know everything about everyone. Don't trust people who constantly bring problems but never offer solutions. People who blame others but never examine themselves. People who talk about loyalty but cannot tolerate seeing other people happy and united. Because genuine strength brings people together. Genuine love protects. Genuine presence brings peace. Dividing energy isolates people. It makes you doubt those you once trusted. It redirects your attention towards small grievances, comparisons, and hidden resentments. And while you're busy defending yourself, repairing what's broken, or clearing up misunderstandings, the person who created the crack in the first place is quietly watching the aftermath. This is how destructive darkness often operates, not only through fear, but through disconnection. It doesn't need to attack you directly. It only needs to separate you from the people who inspire and support you. Because in isolation, you become easier to control, easier to manipulate, easier to break. This is the goal, to sever the bonds that connect you to truth, compassion, and clarity. Ask yourself, who brings more conflict into your life than calm? Who consistently sets people against one another? Who thrives in drama and disappears in times of peace? Who always finds a way to shift the blame elsewhere? Who always has a new story and a new role depending on the audience? These are not simply personality quirks. These are the fingerprints of a soul that knows no peace within itself and does not want others to know it either. Protect your relationships by protecting your environment. When someone brings division, it doesn't matter how charming they are, how close they once seemed, or how subtle their influence appears to be. What matters is what their presence consistently produces. If their presence repeatedly leads to tension, suspicion, and estrangement, then what you're facing isn't a misunderstanding. It's spiritual discord disguised as friendship. Destructive forces do not build, they break. They do not connect, they divide. They do not unite, they fragment. A genuine connection never makes you smaller. It helps you expand. It lets you breathe more deeply, stand more securely, and express your thoughts more clearly. When a person is aligned with your spirit, being around them feels like permission. Permission to be real, to be seen, to be honest. But when someone's energy carries hidden agendas, unresolved pain, or a need for control, it doesn't give you wings. It changes your voice. It doesn't make you feel alive. It makes you afraid to be yourself. Fear as the clearest sign of spiritual darkness. The clearest sign of spiritual darkness is fear. Not the kind of fear that protects you, but the kind that controls you. There is a vast difference between being challenged and being suppressed. Someone who genuinely loves you may point out your mistakes, may help you grow, but they will never try to silence your essence. A destructive presence doesn't amplify you, it suffocates you. You begin filtering your own thoughts. You start walking as though crossing an emotional minefield. You minimize your own truth simply to keep the peace. Ask yourself, why do I feel smaller around this person? Why am I afraid to talk openly about my successes, my joy, or my growth? Why do I find it so hard to set boundaries? Why do I keep bracing for criticism, coldness, or emotional punishment? If the answer is fear instead of love, that is an important signal. Fear is not the fruit of a healthy connection. It tells you that something sacred is quietly being violated. When you spend time around someone carrying this kind of spiritual poison, you'll notice a slow erosion of your own strength. You begin doubting your decisions. You wait for their approval before moving forward. You choose your words carefully so as not to trigger their insecurity or anger. You take responsibility for managing their emotional state. But this isn't care. This is captivity. Control rooted in fear rarely looks like open aggression. Most often, it wears the mask of concern. I'm only saying this because I care about you. But behind that kind of care, there is almost always a hidden condition. Comply, agree, meet expectations, or else face consequences. Silence, withdrawal, shame, passive aggression. Over time, you begin to lose your own voice. Not because it disappeared, but because you were quietly trained to believe that using it wasn't safe. Freedom within a relationship is not the absence of difficulty. It is the presence of safety. A safe connection doesn't require perfection. It allows for mistakes, welcomes questions, and accepts differences. But where fear enters, freedom dies. Your inner compass stops working properly because someone has gradually replaced your own sense of self with their version of reality. You stop asking, "Is this right for me?" and start asking, "Will they approve of this?" This is how darkness often spreads, not always through outright threats, but through subtle, ongoing spiritual dominance. You begin trading your inner freedom for someone else's approval. You begin trading your authenticity for their acceptance. You begin wearing masks, not to protect yourself from the world, but simply to survive inside your own relationships. And the most tragic part is that over time, you may start calling this love. But real love does not silence, it listens. Real love does not control, it respects. Real love does not intimidate, it invites. Spiritual freedom is not a luxury, it is your natural state. You are not born to live in fear of rejection, to weigh every word you say, or to reshape your identity simply to be accepted. The presence of fear is the clearest sign that something is wrong, not only emotionally, but energetically. When a person carries unresolved wounds, unhealed darkness, or a destructive kind of energy, they are not seeking connection, they are seeking control. And control always produces fear, not the protective kind, but the silencing kind. You begin fearing their moods, their opinions, their judgment. You avoid being too happy, too bold, too ambitious, because your growth threatens their sense of power. It starts to feel as though your spirit must shrink so that someone else can feel significant enough. But your soul was never meant to exist in a space where it has to make itself smaller just to feel safe. Real connection is freedom. Real love makes room for your light. Real presence lets you grow without fear of being abandoned or punished. But when energy is saturated with darkness, it will always remind you, directly or indirectly, that your acceptance comes with conditions. You are only welcome as long as you remain who others want you to be. This is the root of fear-based presence. And it is not love. It never was.